So for proportional accuracy, there's lots of tools we can use. We don't usually use the ruler, though we might use older tools. Those sight size folks I was just talking about, they will use tools like these. They will, these little divider tools, they might go, the size of that bottle is from here to here in my view, and so then I would put that on the paper. Okay, it's the kind of tool that a sculptor uses a lot to go from a maquette, a little small study, or a painter might use it for the purposes of making a study that's larger. Some of you may be interested in, or have seen somebody take a photograph and put a grid on it, and then copy grid by grid. That's the same kind of idea. You're doing small measurements and then trying to blow it up or make it smaller. But yeah, artists have used all kinds of tools. Do I think that it's okay to do projections and grids? I'll just do it one simple way to tell you that. A fellow named Leonardo, not the one from the movie The Titanic, but the other famous Leonardo, used what was called a camera obscura. Camera coming from the Italian, Spanish, the word room. Obscura, dark, a dark room. And he would sit in a dark room with a little tiny aperture hole in the doorway. And then there would be a white space on the inside. And the white space on the inside would be opposite the little hole in the door. And he would put a little glass in there, in the hole, and focus the light coming through on the back wall. We've known since the 6th century that camera obscuras create photographic images on the inside of the camera. That's why cameras would have dark spaces to put film in when we had film, as opposed to the digital camera. And you would then use that film to record what was already in there. It was already, we've known this for centuries upon centuries. So he would sit in there and he would trace the picture on the wall. So if Leonardo can trace a photograph, it's okay for us to use any kind of tool we want. So the thing is, there are, like I said, there's a number of ways to do this. So I want to give you some of those names, some of those ideas for proportion. 6B. So, a list. 1, I've already said sight size. That fits into a certain category. We'll see that in just a minute. One of the first ways that we will do this is we will use negative space. Now, negative space is simple. If I'm drawing this thing, one of the things I can do is I can sort of, in my head, put a box around it. And then inside that box, whatever size box I imagine around it, I will then not draw the object. I'll draw the spaces around the object. Why? Because drawing the object, we have thoughts about what the object should look like. But if we're drawing the spaces around it, we have no names for them. Therefore, we end up not being, we don't start criticizing the shape, we start criticizing the proportions of the shape. And it's easier to see the shape, the proportions of the shape, than it is to see the shape of the thing, because we have ideas of what that ball or that box or that bottle should look like. So the negative space, which actually gave you a handout with that earlier in it, the idea that I might come along here and go, okay, if there's a straight line here, let me do a box that really fits right smack dab up against the side of the thing. And yeah, now I'm going to come in and go, yeah, it's round, and then it drops down, and then there's the curve of the side of the bottle from my angle, and it comes out a little further, and I pay attention to that shape, right? I'm drawing the spaces around the outside. It comes down, and then it comes in a little bit more, and then it comes down here, and then it comes down more, and oops, my box wasn't quite long enough. So now I've got a shape like this, that's like this, and a shape down here. So each of these shapes is an outside shape. They are not the bottle, but they are I'm creating the silhouette of the bottle. Does that make sense? So I'm creating the silhouette of the bottle. And you're going to get off, and that's okay, but you're not going to fuss at yourself because you're not drawing the bottle. Bottles don't look like that, John. Well, they might not look like that, but we generally don't work. You know, oh, I went too far. I didn't come in tight enough on this side. Okay. I'm going to come in, and you don't have to fill it in like that. There, I've got that, and then I've got the bottle coming around, and then it comes in from there, and it comes around, and I still need a little more space to get it right. And then there's the upward piece there. And so now what I've got is I've got the negative space around it from my angle. It looks squattier here because you're looking at it this way. I'm looking at it from almost overhead. So it looks squattier. But that's what I'm doing, is I'm just trying to get this. You don't fill in the darks necessarily, but that helps. The first time, a couple of times you do this, it helps to do that. Makes sense. And then once you've got that proportional shape, wherever it goes, you can then, okay, now I can do my lines inside. I can use my contour lines and say, oh yeah, it's fatter here, and then it sort of feels like it's going away from me, so I'm going to let it get lighter, and then where it's really sort of importantly bumpy at the bottom, I might come up, and then you can use the shape you now have to start filling in contour lines that make sense. You can also use the shape as a place to start filling in later on, filling in light or dark areas, shading and all that. But you have a shape that you can use to go from. This idea of using a negative space like that leads us to another technique that some people will use, and they'll call it an envelope drawing. Negative space drawing, envelope drawing. Envelope drawing is very similar, but you might take something that's not a normal thing to be drawing. I have a lot of little rubber duckies for you guys to draw tonight. And one of the reasons is it's a highly irregular shape. But what you do with something like that, let's see if I can at least look at a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, so I could do the box around it. That would work. The other way to think about it is if the duck is sort of a shape like this, right? Pretend that doesn't exist. That just tells you where I'm going with this a little bit. So I might come in here and go, I'm not going to do a box, but I will do sort of a shape, an envelope or box, but not a rectangular box, but a simplified box that it's in, and do the same sort of thing where I can go, oh, okay, yeah, then inside that box, I can show where the beak is coming in here, and then that touches the top, and then there's a bit over here. It's very much related to the negative space kind of drawing, but it allows us to get a space around it and then figure out where we're going. It gives us a map of where we can start putting the shape in and start doing all the other stuff. Is this making sense so far? Good. Okay, so these are sort of similar to each other. The idea that you're putting a box or a shape around it to give you a sense of where you're going. And then you can use that and use the negative spaces, if you will. Another thing that a lot of people will do with this is they will add the next one in. They'll use a measured, and remember this is proportional kind of measuring, plumb line. Not plumbing, but yes, a measured plumb line. They'll come through this thing and say, hey, let's put a middle line down whatever shape we're doing. And you might just do it as a plumb line. You can add this into the other techniques, but what you might do with this is you might you might take a straight line and go, okay, right smack dab in the middle is there, and then from there, I might be doing something like this. I'm like, okay, there's the head of this. So the head from here starts here, and it goes to about here, and then I measure again, okay, from the neck, or the bottom of the head, down to the rest of oh, okay. It's exactly this. In fact, it's a little smaller. Because I'm up high, the head looks bigger than it would normally be if I was looking at it from the side. So now I've got wherever the head is, and then I've got the body. Oh, but now I need to figure out where the middle is. Oh, okay. So I might use the head size again. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so I figure that the head, there's the size of the head, but it's actually the body. And then I've got the same thing here, but it actually is longer. So now what I've got is I've essentially got it. These things are going to be related to each other, but the idea that with that plumb line, now I have, okay, there's that, and then there's the angle of the beak, and then I've got this thing that's coming down here, and it's sort of like this, and it's. So what I've got is I've got measurements before I even get started. If you're drawing a figure, you might say, there's the top of the head, and there's the shoulders. Oh, and there's the waist or the hip line, and then there's the knees, and there's the feet. You do some measuring up and down on a plumb line. You could do it in the middle of the body, or you might do it off to the side. And then say, okay, I know where my figure has to fit. Does that make sense? You do a little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and figure out where the main lines are. So I've got a head, I've got a neck, I've got shoulders coming through, and then there's the knees and the feet. So it's the idea you could do it in the body, or you could do it off to the side. A plumb line, sort of a central or offset plumb line. Does that make sense? If you have questions, or if I lose you, don't be afraid to jump in, because she's going to have the same questions. Okay, and she won't be here to ask the question. So if I'm not clear, even if I'm just not clear. So measured line, these are all techniques that we could use. Okay, here's one that you will see me use a lot, and I don't recommend anybody doing it, but it's basically the idea of the silhouette, but it's another one. It's called sustained gesture line. Now, gesture means you sort of quickly draw something by going around it and through it. So what I'm doing is I'm doing the duck going, and then I'm not getting accuracy yet, but I'm getting basic shape. And then I've got this other thing over here, this bottle that's coming up, and it's rounder here, it's thinner here, and it's sort of got this cylinder up here, and then it's got shoulders, and then it's got the top on it. And then I can begin to do some of these things I was looking at before. I can look at angles between the parts. Yes, I can do that. I could do that, but the sustained gesture doesn't do that yet. What it's really doing is it's going to give us, we're really looking and responding to what we're seeing. It's it's almost like our contour drawing, but it's fast and it never stops. And we just keep doing it until we almost get a silhouette of the thing, and then it's got to be taller there, and it's really, really. I've drawn the old Coca-Cola bottle. I haven't drawn the real, the fatter plastic version. Yeah, there we go, that's better. So, and I might, in fact, help it along by doing cross contour lines as part of my gesture. That helps me sort of see the curves that are actually there. Now, what I don't have well done here is I don't have a lot of details, right? There's a lot of details missing, but that's okay, because what I might be doing at that point is I might be on top of this, or on top of this, or on top of these, I'm putting more details in. I'm doing erasing. I'm getting rid of stuff as much as I'm putting things in. Does that make good sense? Okay. So that's 4 of them right there. Now, some of the other ones that I can show you, and I will show you with a handout, that I don't need to do them all, but from here, from negative space and envelope drawing, we get to something that's called diagrammatic drawing. Diagrammatic drawing, and I always misspell diagrammatic. Diagrammatic drawing. What that does is it's basically like this, but then once it gets into having the shape there, it begins to break it apart into small shapes. A diagram. Sort of the idea of, if I have a negative space for that duck, if I do a negative space drawing for that duck, and it's here, I've drawn around it, and I've got the beak coming up, and then there's the bottom of the head, and then I made it too small. But you get the idea that you've got your drawing here of your thing, and it fits in your box, diagrammatic. Then you start chopping it up, and you start doing things like, wherever I can see a line, oh yeah, the head comes around and curves over to here, and you're always dividing the shape into smaller and smaller pieces. And so here I can see where the beak is not quite right. I'm going, okay, I got to redo that beak, but I'm going to cut that shape off. And then, oh, the beak actually has a side to it. And so what you end up getting when you're finished with this, I'm going to do the shadow now. There's a shadow that comes in here. Yeah, you can draw you're not going to put the shadow in, you're just going to draw the shape of the shadow. So there's a shape of a shadow right there. So I've cut the shape into 2 big pieces. And then on that shadow, yay, thankfully it's there, that allows me to also then carve out where the eye is. And then I can come over here and say, oh, there's a wing sticking up. And that's a little more of a peak there. And then there's that wing actually comes up a little higher. But I'm always cutting the shape into smaller and smaller pieces. They were dividing the shapes into pieces. And you'll see that in the handout. The idea that this is really good, then you might go this way with it and end up finally getting into so many shapes. The shadow shape here. And then up above that there is the other wing. And the shadow on the wing. And you keep dividing the shape into smaller and smaller pieces, and then you can begin to add shading, or then you can say, oh, I really need better lines. I need to make lines that mean something. Is that making sense? So it's a proportional map. And why map? Why is map interesting and neat and appropriate? Well, if you're designing anything, you need to know what size you're fitting the thing into. So these are some very normal ones, okay? So, but the idea of sustained gesture, measured plumb line, envelope drawing, negative space leading to maybe diagrammatic. And then there's a half a dozen others, but they're different kinds of measuring. And then you can, once you've got these, like with the measured plumb line drawing, you might then begin to think about angles and looking at proportions of angles and how things move throughout the page, which is not altogether different than the external envelope going, oh, there seems to be a line, I'm lining up pieces here where this thing can fit into, right? So does it make sense? Okay, so what I'm going to have us do today is we're going to do the very first one we're going to do. I could have you do this one by basically holding a line horizontally, vertically, and then that way. And we'll do that. And what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to put one thing in front of you first, and we'll do one. and we'll definitely fill in the outside so we get a sense of that. The other thing is, what you're doing when you're doing this, you're getting a silhouette. This is a silhouette as well. So the silhouette is a good thing for us to do. Then we'll flip it and do, this is a negative silhouette. We might also do a positive silhouette, just filling it in. And then we'll move from here to an envelope drawing, and then we'll use whichever one of those two fits with your idea, what you need to be doing, what feels right for you. And we'll move in the direction of adding plumb lines and diagrammatic lines, where you start to divide the thing into more and more pieces. And the trick with it, if you get to do the diagrammatic line, every line has to start at another line and divide the space into a smaller piece. So, an example of that, I'll give you a good example of that with the bottle. So if I've already got my bottle, to put it someplace where you guys can still see what I'm doing. That's not in the right spot for you. You can still see this, okay. So I've got a bottle, and I'm gonna do there's the top, and I might even be thinking of a plumb line in my head, but I don't have to do that yet. But I'm gonna come down in here and go, okay, now it comes down, it flanges out on the end of the cap, and then it comes in a slow curve until it hits the edge. John, it's a thinner bottle, John. So don't be afraid to add to your box or make your box smaller as you do it. I'm like, okay, it's coming down more like that. And then once it does that, it actually bumps in ever so slightly, just barely. And then it bumps back out again as it starts to get to the bottom, and then it comes in, and then back out. And I went past my box because I didn't have it in there right. So now I know that the bottom of my box is really here. You can adjust your box. Leonardo adjusted his drawings all the time. So did Michelangelo, so did Vermeer, so did everybody else. It's normal. Have you ever tossed your drawing because you didn't like what you did? Just ball it up and throw it away? Never again, because you can always go back and make it better. But particularly don't do it in the beginning stages where you're still just trying to figure out if the shape is right. Look at that, that's better, but it's still going too far. In other words, this one's too high a shoulder, this one's about closer to being correct. Guess what that means? That means I can come in, I can change that one? Yes. So you come in, and then you come back out again, a little less than I did it over here. It's a more subtle line. Yes. Coke may not be subtle, but their bottle designs were. And it comes out a little long, takes a little longer, and comes back out here, and comes back around. And then that means this one's gonna do the same thing. So now you have an eraser. May I borrow your eraser since I've got mine, but it's not right away where I can see it. So now the first thing you'll do with that is, of course, you'll get rid of, but see what I've got here? And then, of course, you come back in and you get rid of the lines that are not important, that are less than completely accurate. But then when you're done with this, you're gonna have a silhouette, a linear silhouette that is essentially almost like a mechanical contour line drawing. And it's a little bit too high here, a little bit too low, not low enough here. There we go, that's better. But you see, it's fitting inside of its box. Before you go any further, you might then throw in that plumb line and check to see if things are the right length, widest part. Are the bumps and lumps lining up? If they're not, then adjust so they're right. You can do the same thing from side to side, figuring out whether things are in the right spot. where you're doing, oh, is that the right angle? If that line was a straight line, where would it stop? Up here. Better yet, what is the angle right from this thing to that thing? That's what we do with angles. We might be on a drawing that you're putting them together and you're like, oh, the tip of this is up here. And then I look for the angle. I look, is the angle right? And if it's not right, I have to cut it out and then drop. No. But you have to move part of your drawing. But that's why you do that early on if you're doing multiple pieces. But we're going to start with one, and then I'll give you a demonstration of the angle. Yes?
What's the envelope technique again?
The envelope technique is instead of putting a rectangle around it, you actually respond to the shape you're looking at. So let me give you one that you can see.